Okay, so we talked about the Brisbane floods, which is what happens when there's too much rain, but let's talk about when there isn't enough rain. Okay, drought is kind of like a silent disaster. It kind of creeps up on you. Unlike a bushfire or a flood or a tornado or hurricane or tsunami, it's not immediate, it's not instant, it's not current. It just kind of happens over months and years. So it sneaks up on you. So you don't really notice that you're in a drought until you're actually in it. And that's why it's kind of a bad situation to be in. Because you actually don't know it's coming. You can't kind of do much, so you can't start preparing once it comes at you because you don't know that it's happening. So why do droughts happen? Well, droughts happen because rainfall patterns are changing. And rainfall patterns change for all sorts of reasons. Weather patterns change. There's an old saying, 7 years of drought, 7 years of rain. And that's kind of what farmers talk about. They talk about the cycle of weather, that it does come in cycles. But one of the things that's been happening recently is that there's been a bit of a change in weather patterns. A lot of it they talk about is relation to climate change and how climate patterns change. So what you can see here is this is just the last 3 months. And you can see here, this is the rainfall patterns around Australia as a percentage of what would be expected. So what the BOEM has done is they've said, well, what do we normally expect to see in this 3 month period? And then they've rated whether or not it's actually happened or not. So here you can see a large amount of Australia, including Tasmania that's normally quite wet, is actually below average for what's expected. So remember, this is the difference between climate and weather. And so they're looking at patterns over time and what the average would be expected for this month. And all these areas of Australia received less than what was expected, okay, for this time period. So we can see definitely that there are changes in our weather pattern and our rain patterns. And a lot of the fields here in South Australia is where a lot of growth happens, and the wheat belt over here in WA, that's where we grow a lot of our crops. And if they're not getting rain, then that's a problem as well. So you can see already, there's massive changes happening, and that's below average. And so droughts happen when we get consistently low levels of rainfall or lower than expected. So what are the impacts? Well, as you can see here, you can pause this if you like and have a read. There's a range of impacts for ecological reasons. So native animals, they starve to death just the same as the cows in the paddock when there's no feed. And so when you have a drought, the food declines, water declines, and obviously animals need water and food to live. So when we have drought, we have massive deaths just based on a lack of supply of food and water. The other thing, of course, that happens is it's the web of life. So if there's less grasses, then there's less insects. If there are less insects, there are less of the animals that eat the insects, and there's less of the animals that eat those animals. And so you actually break down the whole cycle, the whole web of life that happens in relation to animals. So there's a massive ecological impact. And we've also talked about how topsoil gets washed away. So when the rains do come, if there's been a massive drought, when the rains do come, it washes all the soil away because it becomes dust. And you may remember the dust storms that happen as well, where topsoil just gets whipped up by the wind and carried to a different location. So we actually do have massive impacts that happen to the environment when we're in drought. Then, of course, there's the human cost. And a part of that human cost is an increase in the stress system. So farmers, for example, they actually have an increase in their suicide rate during droughts, which is a dreadful thing to have happen. They can't feel as though they've got a way out. And this is because of what happens when they get stressed, because you can't see an end to it. Again, it's not like a bushfire. It's not like, oh wow, this is going to be dreadful for a couple of days, but then it's going to end and we'll see the damage and then we can work out how to move forward. The problem with a drought is that you don't actually ever know when it's going to end. And so this puts a lot of stress on the system, and it makes people very, very sad. And that's a massive social cost and obviously a cost of human life. And the other thing is there's a financial cost to humans. So there's a financial cost to the individual farmers who are growing stuff, who can't grow stuff anymore, who have to reduce their stock levels and things like that. So they're actually reducing their income. But there's also an impact, financial cost for the rest of Australia. And a part of that is that we don't make as much money. So we actually export a lot of the food that we grow. And when there's a drought, we can't grow as much food, so we don't make as much money as a country. And the other thing is that we have to support our farmers, so the taxpayers actually end up paying to support farmers through the drought period, through payments made by the government to support farmers. So there's a massive human cost when we have droughts. And as I said, it's not like a bushfire where you can see the end. We actually don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know when it's going to change. And these are the sources that I've used, just for your information. Again, I've done it in Harvard style for you.